Seraphina Caldwell was found lifeless in her own home, a place that was supposed to be her sanctuary. Daxton Caldwell, her grieving husband, played the role of a heartbroken widower, but beneath his carefully crafted sorrow lay a web of deceit. Lucian Drake, a man with a dark past, had vanished just hours after the murder, leaving behind traces of a struggle that told a horrifying story. As investigators unraveled the truth, they discovered that Seraphina's death was not a random act of violence. It was a calculated betrayal that exposed the greed, obsession, and ultimate downfall of the two men who had plotted against her. Seraphina Caldwell was the kind of woman people admired. She had beauty, intelligence, and a heart that made her adored by many. Her charitable work had changed lives, and her presence commanded attention wherever she went. Married to Daxton Caldwell, a successful entrepreneur, she lived in a mansion that symbolized power and prestige. Together, they were the embodiment of wealth and influence, a couple whose life seemed untouchable. The media adored them, and their social circles respected them. Yet, behind the grandeur of their world, something sinister lurked, something no one could have predicted. On a cold winter evening, the peaceful facade of their mansion was shattered by a gruesome discovery. It was the housekeeper who found her first. She had arrived early in the morning, expecting another routine day of work, only to stumble upon a sight she would never forget. Seraphina lay motionless in her study, her body sprawled across the floor in a manner that suggested violence rather than an accident. Her expensive silk robe was stained with deep red, the room bearing signs of a struggle. A shattered mirror reflected the horrific scene, its broken shards scattered across the floor. The police were called immediately, and within minutes, investigators swarmed the estate. Nothing had been stolen, a fact that ruled out a simple robbery. Seraphina's jewelry remained untouched on the dresser, her designer handbag still resting on the chair with her phone inside. The crime scene seemed staged, too deliberate to be the result of random violence. But the most disturbing clue was the message smeared on the wall, written in what appeared to be blood. The words were short, but chilling, a cryptic phrase that made no immediate sense. News of her death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the city. Reporters camped outside the mansion, eager for any detail about what had happened inside the Caldwell estate. The public, who had seen Seraphina as a symbol of grace and generosity, struggled to comprehend the tragedy. How could someone so beloved meet such a cruel fate? Tributes poured in from high-profile figures, celebrities, and politicians. The world mourned, yet beneath the sorrow, speculation grew. Was this a random attack, or was there something more sinister at play? Investigators turned their attention to Daxton Caldwell, the grieving husband whose alibi would be the first to be questioned. He had been away that evening, supposedly attending an emergency business meeting. Surveillance footage confirmed his departure, but his reaction to Seraphina's death raised more questions than answers. He was devastated, yet his responses seemed rehearsed, too measured for a man who had just lost his wife in such a brutal manner. The deeper the authorities dug, the more inconsistencies surfaced. The mansion's security system had recorded an unusual glitch around the estimated time of death. For nearly 10 minutes, the cameras near Seraphina's study went dark. This was no coincidence, the detectives concluded. Someone had intentionally tampered with the system. But who and why? In the coming days, forensic experts worked tirelessly to uncover evidence. The cause of death was clear: multiple stab wounds, inflicted with precision. The attack had been personal, the injuries too, specific to be the work of an inexperienced killer. The placement of the body, the eerie message on the wall, and the untouched valuables pointed to a calculated crime rather than an impulsive act of violence. Whoever had done this had planned it carefully, ensuring that their true motive remained hidden. The mansion, once a place of luxury and joy, had become a crime scene drenched in mystery. Investigators knew they were dealing with more than just a murder. This was a statement, a message from the killer, but its meaning remained buried beneath layers of secrets yet to be unraveled. As investigators pieced together the final hours of Seraphina Caldwell's life, disturbing details began to surface. Her world, once perceived as perfect, was far from it. The elegant mansion, the high-profile parties, and the image of a devoted couple were merely a well-crafted illusion. Behind closed doors, cracks in the facade had been widening for years. The first major lead came from the mansion's security footage. While most cameras had functioned normally, the ones closest to Seraphina's study had suffered an unexplained blackout during the critical window of time. Someone had tampered with them deliberately, ensuring that their movements would go undetected. Suspicion naturally fell on Daxton Caldwell. His alibi was solid on the surface. He had attended a last-minute business meeting at an upscale hotel. Surveillance confirmed his presence, and multiple witnesses vouched for him. But something felt off. Investigators found a troubling detail in his financial records. Despite projecting an image of wealth and stability, Daxton's business empire was crumbling. Recent bank statements revealed millions in losses, secret loans, and failed investments. He had managed to keep the reality hidden from the world, but the pressure had been mounting. The timing of Seraphina's murder made investigators question whether her death was more than just a tragedy. It could have been his way out of financial ruin. More troubling evidence came from Seraphina's personal journal, discovered tucked away in a locked drawer of her study. The entries painted a chilling picture of a woman living in fear. She had been receiving anonymous letters, cryptic messages that left her unsettled. She wrote about feeling watched, followed by someone who never revealed themselves. One entry, written just days before her murder, mentioned a shadow from her past returning. The words were vague, yet they hinted at a deep-seated fear, one she had kept hidden from everyone except one person, Soren Mercer. Soren Mercer was a name unfamiliar to investigators, but a closer look revealed his connection to Seraphina. He was a former criminal profiler, once working on high-profile cases before vanishing from the public eye. His name appeared in Seraphina's phone records multiple times in the weeks leading up to her death. Investigators tracked him down, hoping he could shed light on the growing mystery. When confronted, Soren admitted that Seraphina had reached out to him in distress. She had asked for his help, convinced that someone from her past was trying to destroy her. She never shared a name, only referring to them as a ghost she had tried to forget. Detectives now had two major threads to follow: Daxton's financial struggles and the mysterious threat from Seraphina's past. The investigation took another sharp turn when forensic analysts reviewed the crime scene in greater detail. The blood-smeared message on the wall was partially obscured, but when enhanced, it revealed a name: Lucian Drake. The name immediately sent a ripple through the case. Lucian was a disgraced financier who had been convicted years ago for embezzlement, largely due to Seraphina's testimony. She had been instrumental in exposing his fraudulent dealings, ensuring his downfall. His sentencing had been swift, but his release had been quiet, unnoticed by the media. The deeper investigators looked, the more alarming the connections became. Lucian had been released from prison months before Seraphina's murder. He had disappeared from public records, making no known appearances or transactions. Then came the biggest revelation. Lucian had been spotted near the Caldwell estate just days before the murder. Security cameras from a neighboring property had captured him in the background, a shadow lingering at a distance. Had he been watching Seraphina? Had he been the one behind the messages she feared? Daxton Caldwell remained a suspect, but now the case had grown even more complicated. Two men had clear motives. One was a husband drowning in debt, desperate for an escape. The other was a man who had lost everything and had vowed revenge. The investigation was far from over, and the truth was buried beneath layers of deception, waiting to be uncovered. The investigation into Seraphina Caldwell's murder took a darker turn as detectives followed the leads connecting her to Lucian Drake. His sudden disappearance after being released from prison was too suspicious to ignore. If he had been watching her, he could have been the source of the anonymous letters that had left her unsettled. But proving his involvement wasn't easy. Lucien had left almost no trace of himself in the months leading up to the murder. No financial transactions, no official documents, and no known addresses. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, only to resurface near the Caldwell estate in the days before Seraphina's death. Detectives tracked down former associates of Lucien, hoping for any clue about his whereabouts. Most of them wanted nothing to do with him, fearful of his unpredictable nature. However, one former business partner, Elijah Tate, revealed something crucial. He claimed that after Lucien's release, he had spoken of unfinished business and hinted at making someone pay for what they had done to him. He never mentioned Seraphina's name, but his bitterness was clear. More disturbingly, Elijah disclosed that Lucien had recently accessed a large sum of money from an unknown source. If Lucien had been financially ruined, where had this sudden influx of cash come from? While detectives were piecing together Lucien's movements, a forensic breakthrough at the Caldwell mansion pointed them in a new direction. A hidden camera had been installed inside Seraphina's study, concealed within an antique bookshelf. This camera wasn't part of the mansion's security system, which meant whoever placed it had done so secretly. The footage was recovered, though most of it had been wiped. However, forensic experts managed to restore a portion of the final moments before the cameras went dark. The recovered footage showed Seraphina sitting at her desk, visibly distressed. She appeared to be reading a letter, her hands shaking. Moments later, she turned toward the doorway, as if hearing something. The screen then went black. This revelation raised terrifying questions. Someone had been spying on Seraphina from inside her own home. But who had access to plant the hidden camera? The mansion had a strict security system, and few people had the ability to bypass it. The investigation returned to Daxton Caldwell. If he had planted the camera, it could mean he had been monitoring his wife for reasons far beyond concern. But if Lucien had somehow gained access to the mansion, it would confirm that he had been stalking Seraphina, possibly for months. Detectives searched for any connection between Daxton and Lucien, and what they found changed everything. Through a careful examination of Daxton's financial records, they discovered an encrypted offshore account that had made a large withdrawal weeks before Seraphina's murder. The amount matched the sum that Lucien had allegedly gained access to. It was no coincidence. The evidence pointed to a horrifying possibility. Daxton had secretly transferred money, and Lucien had received it. But why? The investigation now faced two possibilities. Either Daxton had paid Lucien to kill Seraphina, or Lucien had blackmailed Daxton into helping him get close to her. Both scenarios were equally chilling. If Daxton had been working with Lucien, it meant he had orchestrated his wife's death. If Lucien had been manipulating Daxton, it meant he had used his knowledge of the businessman's financial troubles to force his way back into Seraphina's life. Either way, the conclusion remained the same. Daxton and Lucien were connected, and Seraphina had been caught in the middle of a dangerous conspiracy. The next major breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A security breach at a private medical facility revealed that Lucien Drake had checked in under an alias just a day after Seraphina's murder. Surveillance footage from the hospital confirmed his injuries, cuts on his hands and bruises on his face, injuries consistent with a violent struggle. If Lucien had attacked Seraphina, she had fought back. And if he had been admitted to a hospital, it meant he hadn't been able to flee as planned. Detectives now had the missing piece they needed. Lucien hadn't vanished after the murder. He had been hiding in plain sight. But his injuries told another story. Seraphina had fought harder than he expected, possibly wounding him in ways that could provide forensic proof of his presence. At the crime scene, the walls were closing in, and soon the full truth behind her murder would be revealed. As detectives closed in on Lucien Drake, the puzzle of Seraphina Caldwell's murder became more complex. His hospital visit had been his biggest mistake. The injuries on his hands and face aligned with evidence found at the crime scene. Traces of skin and blood under Seraphina's fingernails. She had fought for her life, leaving behind proof of her attacker. A forensic match would be enough to place Lucien at the scene, but investigators wanted more than just proof of his presence. They needed to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. Lucian had checked into the hospital under an alias, using forged documents. This suggested he had expected trouble and had a plan to escape. But something had gone wrong. His sudden need for medical attention indicated that Seraphina had inflicted more damage than anticipated. Surveillance footage from the hospital revealed that he had arrived alone, clutching his arm and avoiding security cameras. He had spoken to no one, paid in cash, and left before authorities could track him. But the hospital visit confirmed that he had not fled the country. He was still within reach. Meanwhile, Daxton Caldwell maintained his innocence. He publicly mourned his wife, portraying himself as a devastated husband. However, investigators had already uncovered his hidden offshore account, linking him to a secret transfer of money that ended up in Lucian's possession. The financial records told a story Daxton couldn't explain away. If Lucian had been acting alone, why had Daxton wired him money? The connection was undeniable. Yet, there was no evidence to prove that Daxton had directly ordered his wife's murder. He had never contacted Lucian directly, never left a digital trail of communication. It was as if the entire scheme had been executed with precision, ensuring that Daxton's involvement remained hidden. Determined to uncover the truth, detectives expanded their investigation, looking for any sign of prior contact between the two men. The breakthrough came when they examined the burner phone Lucian had used to check into the hospital. A forensic scan of the device revealed deleted text messages, most of them unreadable. But one fragment remained intact. A single message with the words, "It's done, you're free." The number was untraceable, but investigators knew exactly who the message had been meant for. With mounting pressure, authorities launched a full-scale manhunt for Lucian Drake. His movements had been calculated, but no criminal could stay hidden forever. The search led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where Lucian had been renting a space under another alias. When police raided the location, they found evidence that confirmed their worst suspicions. Inside, they discovered photographs of Seraphina, surveillance notes, and blueprints of the Caldwell estate. Lucian had been stalking her for months, planning every detail of his attack. But there was more. Among the scattered papers, authorities found something unexpected: signed legal documents transferring Seraphina's estate to Daxton Caldwell in the event of her death. The discovery was a turning point. Lucian had been promised something, and Daxton had benefited from Seraphina's murder. It was no longer just a theory. Daxton had orchestrated his wife's death, using Lucian's hatred for Seraphina as a weapon. The offshore account, the secret, surveillance, the planted evidence, it all pointed back to a calculated betrayal. In a final twist, authorities discovered that Daxton had attempted to flee the country. His private jet had been scheduled for departure within hours of Lucian's capture. But it was too late. As he arrived at the airport, police intercepted him, placing him under arrest. His carefully constructed alibi crumbled as the truth came to light. He had set everything into motion, believing he could eliminate his wife and walk away unscathed. But Seraphina's resilience had left behind the evidence needed to expose his crime. Lucian Drake was found hiding in a motel days later, his injuries worsening. He had no choice but to confess. But his confession revealed one final twist. He had never planned to kill Seraphina that night. The attack had escalated beyond his control, and when she fought back, Daxton had refused to intervene, watching from afar as his hired killer struggled to complete the job. The ultimate betrayal was that Daxton had never planned to let Lucian escape. He had intended for him to take the blame entirely, leaving himself free to collect his wife's fortune. In the end, both men were taken into custody, their fates sealed by the very plan they had so carefully constructed. The shocking truth behind Seraphina's murder had been exposed, but the heartbreak of her loss would never be forgotten. The trial of Daxton Caldwell and Lucian Drake became one of the most sensational cases in recent history. The world watched as every chilling detail of Seraphina Caldwell's murder was revealed in court. Prosecutors presented an airtight case, exposing the calculated betrayal that had led to her death, the hidden offshore account, the planted surveillance camera, and the hospital records proving Lucien's injuries all painted a damning picture of two men bound by greed and vengeance. But what shocked the public most was the revelation that Seraphina had unknowingly signed her own death warrant. The legal documents found in Lucien's hideout had been signed by Seraphina just weeks before her murder. Investigators discovered that Daxton had pressured her into updating her will, ensuring that in the event of her death, he would gain full control over her estate. She had signed, unaware of the sinister plan unfolding behind her back. It was no coincidence that Daxton's business empire had been collapsing. He had been counting on her fortune to save himself, and when Lucien was released from prison, Daxton had seen an opportunity to rid himself of his wife while keeping his own hands clean. Lucien, realizing he had been nothing more than a pawn in Daxton's game, turned against him in court. He admitted to breaking into the Caldwell mansion, stalking Seraphina for weeks, and attacking her that fateful night. But his confession came with one chilling detail. Daxton had been watching the murder unfold in real time. The hidden camera in Seraphina's study had been accessed remotely. While Lucien carried out the attack, Daxton had been monitoring it from his office, ensuring that everything went according to plan. But he had underestimated Seraphina. She had fought harder than he expected, leaving behind crucial evidence that led to his downfall. Despite his attempts to shift blame, Daxton's fate was sealed. The jury found him guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. His calculated efforts to cover his tracks had only strengthened the case against him. He had not only planned his wife's death, but had also tried to erase any connection between himself and Lucien. In the end, the very man he had hired became his downfall. Lucien, facing overwhelming evidence, was convicted of first-degree murder. His past crimes and obsession with revenge had led him to commit the brutal act. But his betrayal by Daxton had pushed him to expose the truth. His confession ensured that Daxton received the harshest sentence possible. Both men would spend the rest of their lives in prison, their greed and hatred destroying everything they had hoped to gain. As the trial ended, the world mourned Seraphina Caldwell. She had been a woman of grace, intelligence, and kindness, only to be betrayed by the man she had trusted most. Her funeral was attended by thousands, a testament to the lives she had touched. But even as people honored her memory, the horror of her murder lingered. How could someone so loved become the victim of such cruelty? The case became a cautionary tale of deception, greed, and the darkness that could hide behind even the most perfect facade. In the years that followed, Seraphina's name lived on. A foundation was established in her honor, dedicated to protecting women from domestic betrayal and financial manipulation. Her story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in death, justice could prevail. But for those who had followed the case closely, one question remained unanswered. If Daxton had been watching the murder unfold, why had he not intervened? When Lucien struggled, some believed he had wanted Seraphina to suffer, while others suspected he had simply enjoyed the control. The truth behind his final moments of inaction would never be known. What remained undeniable was that Seraphina Caldwell had fought until her last breath. And in the end, even in the face of the ultimate betrayal, she had ensured that her killers would never walk free.